My wife cheated on me with her boss, after which she wanted a divorce and to take half of my property. I contacted a lawyer and learned the truth. When she asked for money, I sent her away. I grew up in what most people would call an ideal environment. My family was wealthy, really wealthy, but my parents were determined that I wouldn't grow up spoiled. Sure, there was the big house, the vacations, and the private schools, but my parents were different from the other rich parents I knew. They always pushed me to earn my own way. I wasn't the kid who got a Ferrari for his 16th birthday or the one who never had to work. My trust fund was real, but it was also out of reach until I turned 35. Until then, I was on my own. College was my first real taste of independence, even if I was still tethered by some family obligations. I went to an elite school, and it wasn't easy blending in with the crowd when everyone knew I was that guy, the one who was well off, but trying desperately to look normal. Then I met Jenny. She was the breath of fresh air I didn't realize I needed. We met in an economics class. Unlike the other girls I'd met, she didn't seem impressed by money or status. She was smart, funny, and incredibly down-to-earth. I'll admit, I was skeptical at first. After all, how many people truly ignore wealth? But Jenny was different, or at least she seemed to be. She drove a beat-up car, lived in a modest apartment, and never asked for anything. We hit it off fast, and I fell for her in a way I hadn't expected. Jenny seemed perfect. She didn't care about fancy dinners, she didn't ask for expensive gifts, and she was always talking about how she wanted to make it on her own. In my mind, I had found someone who loved me for me, not for the money or the name that came with it. After college, things moved quickly. We moved in together, got a cozy apartment in a quiet part of town, and life felt good. I had a decent job at a tech startup, and Jenny was working as a graphic designer. Money wasn't overflowing, but we were comfortable. Every time I offered to help her out, even with small things like splitting rent or paying for groceries, she would refuse. "I don't want to be that girl," she'd say. It felt genuine, and I admired her independence. But cracks started to show early on, subtle, barely noticeable at first. Jenny would sometimes make offhand comments about how my life had been easier because of my background, how I didn't understand the struggles of someone who grew up without money. At first, I brushed it off. She wasn't wrong, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But the comments kept coming, and slowly, I started feeling like I was being judged for something I couldn't control. We argued more frequently. Little things would set her off. She'd get upset about me working long hours, accusing me of caring more about my job than our relationship. She would get jealous if I spent time with friends, even though she encouraged me to have my own life outside of her. I chalked it up to stress. After all, we were both navigating early adulthood, and who didn't have growing pains? Then one day, out of the blue, Jenny suggested we buy a house. It didn't make sense. Neither of us had the savings for a down payment, and we were doing fine in our apartment. But Jenny was insistent. She started sending me links to properties way out of our budget. "We can make it work," she'd say. "You have the trust fund coming, and I'll start making more soon." That was the first time I felt genuinely uncomfortable. I had always admired Jenny's independence, and now, it felt like she was waiting for the money to come in. I pushed back, explaining that I wouldn't touch the trust fund. Not now, and not for a long time. Jenny didn't take it well. She accused me of being selfish, of not thinking about our future. The conversation spiraled into a huge fight, and for the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake. A few months passed, and things seemed to calm down, but something had shifted between us. Jenny became secretive, spending more time away from home and making vague excuses about work or seeing friends. I tried not to think too much about it, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then one night, Jenny left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. I wasn't the type to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. As I scrolled through her messages, I found something that hit me like a ton of bricks. There were texts between her and an old college friend. Let's call him Mike. From the looks of it, they had been meeting up regularly, and it wasn't just friendly catch-ups. The texts were flirty, suggestive, and more than enough to tell me that something was going on behind my back. I confronted Jenny that same night. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she turned the tables on me, saying that I had been neglecting her, that I was too focused on work and my future to notice what was happening in our relationship. I was floored. Here she was, clearly having an affair, and somehow it was my fault? We argued for hours, and by the end of it, I wasn't even sure what I believed anymore. Things went downhill fast after that. Jenny's behavior became erratic. One day, she would apologize, saying she wanted to work things out, and the next, she'd be distant, cold, and completely uninterested in fixing anything. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Every time I tried to have a serious conversation with her, she would deflect, twist my words, and somehow make me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong. Then, out of nowhere, Jenny proposed. It was a strange moment. We had been on the rocks for months, and suddenly she was asking me to marry her. She did it in the middle of a fight, no less. One second, we were arguing about her recent behavior, and the next, she pulled out a ring. I stood there, dumbfounded. "This will fix everything," she said. "We just need to commit to each other." I couldn't believe what was happening. Jenny, the girl who prided herself on being independent and not caring about status or money, was now suggesting marriage as a way to solve all our problems. It felt like manipulation, plain and simple. I refused, telling her we needed to work on our relationship before even considering something as serious as marriage. That night, Jenny packed a bag and left. She didn't say where she was going or when she'd be back. Days passed, and I heard nothing. I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me was scared. Scared that maybe she was right, that I had somehow driven her away. Then I got a phone call that changed everything. Jenny and I got married just a year after she had proposed. Despite all the rocky moments in our relationship, I convinced myself that things would be different once we tied the knot. After all, she seemed genuinely sorry for the emotional roller coaster of the past, and for a while, things did improve. It felt like we had turned a new page, and for the first few years, life seemed perfect. Jenny had transformed into the perfect wife, or at least that's what I thought at the time. We settled into a comfortable routine. I continued working at the tech startup, and eventually, I moved up the ranks to a managerial position. The money was good, and while we weren't living in extravagant luxury, we were solidly middle class, enjoying the perks of a stable, dual-income household. Jenny, on the other hand, shifted jobs a couple of times, but eventually landed a well-paying position as a creative director at a marketing firm. Everything was fine for 6 years, until it wasn't. I can't pinpoint the exact moment when things started to change, but somewhere along the line, Jenny began pulling away. It started subtly, with small shifts in her mood and her increasing complaints about work. "I'm just so tired," she'd say. "This job is draining me." At first, I didn't think too much of it. We all have bad days at work, and Jenny had always been ambitious, so it wasn't a shock that she was feeling the pressure. But then the business trip started. Jenny's company began sending her all over the country for various campaigns and events. At first, it was just a couple of days here and there. She'd be in Los Angeles for a project, back home for a week, then off to New York for another. "It's just temporary," she assured me. "We're launching a big campaign, and once it's over, things will settle down." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We had built a life together, and I trusted her implicitly. But the trips didn't stop. In fact, they increased. Jenny would be gone for a week, come back for a few days, and then head off to another city. Sometimes, I wouldn't even know where she was until she'd text me from the airport. I tried to be supportive, but it was hard not to feel like something was off. She had always been career-driven, but this was different. She was distant, distracted, and more often than not, completely uninterested in anything happening at home. Our sex life, which had been healthy, dwindled to almost nothing. Whenever I brought it up, Jenny would brush me off. "I'm just too tired," she'd say. "You know how exhausting these trips are." Again, I tried to be understanding. I didn't want to be the needy husband, constantly demanding attention, but it was hard to ignore the growing distance between us. Then came the lies. Small ones at first. She'd tell me she was staying at a certain hotel for work, but when I'd call the front desk, they'd have no record of her. She'd mention a meeting with a client, but when I checked her work calendar, yes, I was getting paranoid, there was no such event scheduled. I started to feel like I was going crazy, like I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, while Jenny was supposedly on a trip to Chicago, I decided to do something I had never done before. I called her company. I asked to speak to her boss, a man named Peter, who I had met at a couple of company events. "Oh, Jenny's not in Chicago," Peter said, sounding confused. "She's been working remotely this week. Didn't she tell you?" The floor dropped out from under me. Jenny had lied. There was no trip to Chicago. She had been lying to me for weeks, maybe months, about where she was and what she was doing. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. What the hell was going on? When Jenny got home a few days later, I confronted her. At first, she tried to lie again, but I had all the evidence. Peter's words, her empty hotel bookings, the fake work meetings. She eventually broke down, but instead of apologizing, she lashed out at me. "You're suffocating me," she screamed. "I can't breathe in this marriage anymore. You have no idea how hard it is for me." I was floored. Suffocating her? We barely saw each other anymore, and now she was acting like I was the problem? It didn't make sense. She stormed out of the house that night, and I didn't hear from her for 2 days. When she finally came back, she was calmer, but her explanation didn't ease my mind. She claimed she had been under immense pressure at work and needed an escape. "I wasn't cheating on you," she said. "I just needed some space. I needed to feel free for a little while." I wanted to believe her, but the trust had been shattered. From that point on, our marriage was on shaky ground. Jenny continued to travel, and though I stopped asking questions, the distance between us only grew. She was hardly home, and when she was, it felt like we were living as roommates rather than husband and wife. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, but every time I tried to bring it up, she'd shut me down, accusing me of being paranoid or controlling. Then, out of nowhere, Jenny suggested we go to marriage counseling. "I want to make this work," she said, her eyes pleading with me. "I know things have been tough, but I still love you. I want us to be okay." Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the idea that we could fix what had been broken. So, we went. Counseling was awkward, to say the least. Jenny put on this front, acting like she was the perfect wife who had just made a few mistakes. She apologized for the lies, but she always found a way to twist the narrative so that it was somehow my fault too. "You're never home," she'd say. "You're always working late," and I felt neglected. It was infuriating. Yes, I worked hard, but I had always been there for her. She was the one who had been absent, physically and emotionally. The therapist tried to help us communicate better, but every session ended the same way, with Jenny playing the victim and me feeling more confused than ever. After a few months, we stopped going. It felt pointless. Then things took an even stranger turn. Jenny started talking about wanting to start a family. "We've been married for 6 years," she said one night over dinner. "It's time we think about having kids." The idea hit me like a truck. How could we even consider having children when our marriage was hanging by a thread? I didn't know what to say, but Jenny was relentless. She kept bringing it up, week after week, acting as though a baby would magically fix everything between us. One day, I came home to find Jenny in the living room, her suitcase packed. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I need to go away for a while," she said quietly. "I need to figure things out. I can't do this anymore." She left that night, and just like that, I was alone. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing from her. I tried calling, texting, even reaching out to her friends, but no one seemed to know where she was. It was like she had disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, one evening, I got a call from her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I've been so lost. I don't know who I am anymore. I need more time." And with that, the line went dead. I spent the next few months in a fog, unsure of what to do or where we stood. I missed her, but I also felt a deep sense of betrayal. How could she just leave like that without any explanation? What had happened to the woman I had fallen in love with, the one who had promised me forever? Eventually, I started piecing my life back together. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the empty house and the constant questions swirling in my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that there was more to the story than Jenny was telling me. After my parents passed away, things took a turn I never could have anticipated. My father had been sick for a while, but my mother's death came suddenly, a heart attack that took her overnight. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My parents were my anchors, the ones who had always supported me, guided me, and now they were gone. I was devastated, but I threw myself into work to cope. I told myself it was the best way to deal with the grief, to stay busy, to stay productive. Jenny was there, but even at my lowest point, I noticed she wasn't as present as I needed her to be. She would say the right things, offer the usual condolences, but her mind seemed elsewhere, always distracted. I chalked it up to her work stress, not wanting to add more to her plate, but deep down, I knew something had changed. I started staying late at the office, not because I needed to, but because it was easier than being at home. Home felt empty, and Jenny felt like a stranger. She was traveling more than ever now, constantly jetting off for work trips. The distance between us grew wider by the day, but I convinced myself that it was just a rough patch. We had been through so much, we would figure it out. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Then one afternoon, everything changed. It was a Friday, and I decided to leave work early. I hadn't told Jenny I'd be coming home sooner than usual, hoping to surprise her. Maybe we could have dinner together, talk about everything that had been weighing on my mind. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house. It was a sleek, black Audi, definitely not the kind of car Jenny's friends drove. My heart raced as I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. Something felt off. I opened the door quietly, trying not to make any noise. The house was eerily quiet, and as I made my way through the hallway, I heard voices coming from the living room. One of them was Jenny's, and the other was a man's, deep, confident, and too familiar. My stomach sank. I couldn't place it right away, but I knew I had heard that voice before. As I stepped into the living room, the scene that unfolded before me felt like something out of a nightmare. Jenny was sitting on the couch, her legs draped over the lap of none other than Peter, her boss. They were laughing, completely unaware that I had just walked in. It took them a moment to notice me standing there, frozen in shock. Jenny's smile disappeared the second she saw me. She stood up abruptly, pulling her legs off Peter as if she had been caught doing something innocent, like it was no big deal. Peter, on the other hand, didn't even flinch. He sat there, cool and composed, as if nothing about the situation was wrong. That's when it hit me. This had been going on for a long time. This wasn't a one-time thing. They were comfortable together, too comfortable. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. Jenny didn't answer right away. She looked at Peter, as if waiting for him to say something, but when he didn't, she finally spoke. "I think it's time we talk," she said, her tone unnervingly calm. "Talk?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Are you kidding me? What is he doing here? What the hell is going on, Jenny?" She sighed, like she was already tired of the conversation that hadn't even started yet. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, avoiding my eyes. "But I'm leaving. Peter and I are going to Italy together. I've been offered a position there, and, well, we've decided it's the best thing for both of us." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Italy? What the hell was she talking about? She couldn't be serious. I glanced at Peter, who was still sitting there, his expression completely devoid of any shame or guilt. He didn't even bother to get up, as if my entire life crumbling in front of me was just a minor inconvenience to him. "You're leaving?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just like that? You're throwing everything away?" Jenny finally met my eyes, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something. Maybe guilt, maybe regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I've been unhappy for a long time," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've been so focused on work, on everything but us, and I can't do this anymore. Peter and I cut her off before she could finish. "Peter and you? Are you seriously standing here telling me that you've been screwing your boss while I've been busting my ass to make sure we have a good life?" Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms, as if preparing for a fight. "It's not like that," she said defensively. "This isn't just about you. You haven't exactly been the perfect husband either." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to turn this around on me, as if her betrayal was somehow my fault. I felt the anger rising inside me, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not in front of him. When did this start? I asked, my voice cold and steady. How long have you been lying to me? Jenny hesitated for a moment before answering. A few months, she admitted. It started when we were going through that rough patch, after your parents passed. I didn't know how to reach you, and Peter was. He was there for me. I stared at her, incredulous. So you ran to him? Instead of talking to me, you decided to sleep with your boss? She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. It wasn't like that, she said again. But the words sounded hollow, even to her. I turned my attention to Peter, who had been silent throughout the whole exchange. And you? I asked, my voice dripping with contempt. What's your excuse? He shrugged, completely unfazed. We're adults, he said simply. These things happen. Jenny and I have a connection, and we've decided to pursue it. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but it is what it is. I clenched my fists, every fiber of my being wanting to punch him right in the face, but I knew it wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to control the rage bubbling inside me. So, what now? I asked, turning back to Jenny. You're just going to leave? Move to Italy with him and pretend like none of this ever happened? She nodded, though there was a sadness in her eyes. I'm filing for divorce, she said quietly. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'll have the papers sent over next week. Divorce. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I had known things were bad, but I never thought it would come to this. I never thought she would actually leave me for someone else, especially not like this. I stood there in stunned silence as Jenny walked past me, heading for the door. Peter got up and followed her, pausing only to give me a brief, condescending nod before he left. The door closed behind them, and just like that, they were gone. I stood in the living room, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. My marriage was over. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, had just walked out the door with another man. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. For hours, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Jenny and Peter had been. I replayed the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. It was like I was living in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. In the days that followed, I barely left the house. I called in sick to work, not ready to face the world, not ready to explain to anyone what had happened. I ignored Jenny's calls and texts. There wasn't anything left to say. The divorce papers arrived a week later, just as she had promised, and I signed them without hesitation. There was no point in fighting it. She had already made her choice. The life we had built together was over, and all I had left were the shattered pieces. After the initial shock of Jenny's betrayal, I began to piece things together. Something had always felt off about how quickly she had moved on with her boss, Peter. It wasn't just that she had left me so abruptly, but the way she had planned everything in advance. The divorce, the trip to Italy. It all seemed too calculated. Like this was something she had been preparing for months, if not longer. As the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I reached out to a mutual friend of ours, Megan, who worked in the same industry as Jenny. I wasn't looking to dig up dirt, but I needed some answers. Megan was hesitant at first, but eventually opened up. She had heard rumors, whispers around the office, that Jenny and Peter's affair hadn't just started recently. It had been going on for over a year. A year. That meant Jenny had been lying to me for longer than I even realized. While I was grieving the loss of my parents, she was sleeping with her boss, all the while pretending to be the supportive wife. I felt sick to my stomach, but it didn't stop there. Megan also told me something that completely blindsided me. She had overheard Jenny talking to one of her coworkers about her plans after the divorce. Apparently, Jenny had assumed that she would be entitled to a significant portion of my trust fund. She had been under the impression that once we were divorced, she could walk away with a hefty settlement, leaving me high and dry. That's when it hit me. Jenny's endgame had never been about Peter or Italy. She had been playing a long con, waiting for the divorce to go through so she could get her hands on the money. The realization made my blood boil. I had been nothing but loyal to her for years, and this entire time, she had been scheming behind my back, planning to leave me and cash in on a future she hadn't earned. I wasted no time. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I needed to know exactly what Ginny was entitled to, if anything, and how I could protect what was rightfully mine. When I met with my attorney, Mr. Harris, he reviewed the terms of my trust. I had always known that the trust fund had certain protections in place, but I hadn't paid much attention to the specifics. As it turned out, Ginny was in for a rude awakening. Your wife isn't entitled to a penny from the trust, Mr. Harris explained, flipping through the paperwork. The trust is structured in such a way that only you have access to it, and only after you turn 35. Divorce doesn't change that. Whatever settlement she's hoping for, it won't come from the trust. A wave of relief washed over me. Ginny had been banking on the idea that she could walk away with part of my inheritance, but she was wrong. I wouldn't be giving her anything. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to play it cool. I didn't contact Ginny, didn't bring up what I had learned. I wanted her to think she was still in control of the situation, that her plan was still working. Let her think she was winning, until it was too late. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Anna, Peter's wife. I had met her once or twice at company events, but we had never really spoken. She was a tall, striking woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude. When I opened the door, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "We need to talk." I invited her in, unsure of what to expect. We sat in the living room, and after a few moments of silence, she finally spoke. "I know about Peter and Jenny," she said bluntly. "I've known for a while now, and I'm done pretending like it's not happening." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to apologize, but I knew this wasn't my fault. Anna wasn't looking for an apology anyway. She had come with a plan. "I want to punish them," she said, her voice firm. "Peter thinks he's going to walk away from this without any consequences, and Jenny thinks she's going to live off your money. I say we give them both a reality check." I was taken aback. I hadn't expected Anna to come to me with such a proposition, but as she laid out her plan, I realized she was right. Both Peter and Jenny were expecting us to roll over and let them walk away without a fight. They had betrayed us, and they deserved to face the consequences of their actions. Anna's idea was simple but effective. We would work together to make sure neither of them got what they wanted. I would refuse to give Jenny any money, and Anna would use her leverage within Peter's company to make sure his career took a nosedive. Anna had connections with some of Peter's biggest clients, and she planned to quietly pull the rug out from under him. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be too late. I agreed to her plan. It was time to stop playing the victim and start taking control of the situation. We spent the next few weeks quietly putting everything into place, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then came the day Peter showed up at my office. I had just finished a meeting when my secretary buzzed me. "There's a man here to see you," she said. "He says his name is Peter." I felt a rush of anger but kept my cool. I told her to send him in. Peter walked into my office with the same smug confidence I had seen that day in my living room. He didn't even bother with small talk. "I think we need to clear the air," he said, sitting down across from me. "Do we?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, keeping my tone casual. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Look, I know this situation has been difficult for everyone, but Jenny and I are trying to move forward." She mentioned the trust fund, and I think we can come to an understanding that benefits everyone. I stared at him, barely believing the audacity of this man. He thought he could waltz into my office and negotiate a payout? I let him talk for a few more minutes, but the more he spoke, the more absurd it became. Finally, I cut him off. "There's no money, Peter," I said, my voice cold and firm. "Jenny isn't entitled to any part of the trust, and I won't be giving her anything. You two can do whatever you want, but you won't be getting a dime from me." Peter's smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He tried to recover, but it was clear that he hadn't expected this. "I think you should reconsider," he said, his tone shifting to something more threatening. "I'm not reconsidering anything," I replied, standing up and walking toward the door. "This conversation is over. You can show yourself out." He stared at me for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to push further, but eventually, he stood up and left without another word. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched him walk out of my office. It wasn't just about the money, it was about taking back control of my life. For too long, I had let Jenny and Peter dictate the terms, but that was over now. A few weeks later, Jenny showed up at my door. She looked different, tired, worn down, and not at all like the confident woman who had left me for Peter. She didn't even try to hide her desperation. "I need your help," she said, her voice shaky. "Things haven't been going the way I thought they would. Peter, he's not who I thought he was. I made a mistake." I felt a surge of anger, but I kept it in check. "And now you want my help?" I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. "After everything you've done, you expect me to help you?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I messed up, but I'm in trouble. I don't have anywhere else to turn." I looked at her, this woman I had once loved, and I realized something. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel anything for her anymore. Whatever love I had for Jenny had died the moment she betrayed me. "I'm sorry, Jenny," I said, my voice calm and steady, "but I can't help you. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." She looked at me, her face crumpling with emotion, but I didn't waver. I had finally closed that chapter of my life, and there was no going back. Jenny left that day, and I never saw her again. As for Peter, his career took a nosedive after Anna pulled the strings behind the scenes. His clients dropped him, and word spread quickly about his unprofessional behavior. Last I heard, he was struggling to keep his business afloat. Anna and I stayed in touch for a while after everything went down, but eventually, we went our separate ways. We had both gotten what we wanted, closure and a sense of justice. I moved on with my life, ready to leave the past behind me. And for the first time in years, I finally felt free.